Hello, everyone, and welcome to our virtual Fireside chat with Allegheny Health Network. My name is Hallie Johnson, and I am the Academic Program Manager for the Corporate Startup Lab, and we're a CMU Sports Center initiative. So before we begin, I'd just like to do a few quick thank yous to our team at the Sports Center, Allison Hintz, Alex Petkoff, Sonia Ford, Dory Perry, and Sports Center Director Dave Mawhinney for all of their help getting this chat set up. And I'd also like to send a great thank you to Dr. Cohen's colleague, Beth Kilmeyer, for all of her assistance. So tonight's panel will be moderated by Craig Markovitz. He's the Assistant Teaching Professor and Entrepreneur in Residence at the Swart Center for Entrepreneurship. And tonight he's joined by Will Kaigler. He's also the Assistant Teaching Professor and Entrepreneur in Residence at the Swart Center. And he's also the CEO and co-founder of Sova Sage Inc., which is also part of this year's AlphaLab Health cohort. Also on our panel tonight is Dr. Jeff Cohen, MD. He's the Chief Physician Executive, Community Health and Innovation at Allegheny Health Network. So personally, for us at the Corporate Startup Lab, nothing excites us more than seeing large companies participating in transformational innovation that benefits not only its community, but its people and its greater regional ecosystem. And the team at Allegheny Health Network, through repurposing efforts and community partnerships, is offering the Pittsburgh startup community equitable opportunity to leverage its network, its expertise, and its leadership. So tonight we'll hear more about these initiatives. We'll hear advice and guidance for entrepreneurs and those interested in the healthcare technology space, as well as the entrepreneurial journeys that brought our panel together. We'll have about 10 to 15 minutes reserved at the end for Q&A. So please write your questions in the chat or raise your hand and we'll answer as many as we can. And with that, I'll leave you with Craig to get this started.
Thanks, Hallie. Welcome, everyone. It's nice to see so many folks joining us this evening. Really looking forward to the discussion and getting some insight from Dr. Cohen and from Will around entrepreneurship and Pittsburgh entrepreneurship and their experiences. And hopefully we'll all get to learn something valuable tonight that we can take with us. So the structure for this evening's discussion will be a series of questions that I will direct towards either both or individual panelists, and they'll take some time to answer the question. And as Hallie said, we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A. So please feel free to drop your questions into the chat. Hallie and some other folks will keep track, and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can. So without further ado, Dr. Cohen, I'd like to start with you. And can you please briefly walk us through your career and your career as an entrepreneur, and how have these experiences led you to today and the current role that you're in?
So I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I'm a urologist by training. Finished in Cleveland at Case Western, did a fellowship at MD Anderson. Met my wife before I left for Houston to go to MD Anderson. And she informed me that we're moving to Pittsburgh. And I said, yes, dear. Well, words that you learn when you're married. And I came here very much a straight apple. College, medical school, residency, fellowship, ended up at Allegheny General. Was a great place when I walked in 1985. And I just started operating and taking care of people, and how do you build urology as a department of division. And from 85 to 95 was just like the most wonderful place in the world. And there were these crazy people running around like George McGovern, and George was an entrepreneur, and he was a researcher. He was a great leader, best chairman of surgery I ever had. And we believed our own nonsense, but they started Respironics, and there were multiple other companies that came out of AGH. It had money, it had patience, it had prominence, and it also became the largest bankruptcy for a non-for-profit in the history of the United States. So at that point, we were faced with certain problems like, how do you manage a practice? What are you going to do? And you realize you're not going to have any capital for a period of time. So any kind of non-for-profit research is out the window. And I decided that I was going to stay there. And the place had been very good to me. So we had to figure out how to run a practice. And we found the marvels of a credit line, and how do you start a business all by yourself, and billing and things like that. And then we realized that we needed other equipment, and we started creating companies to buy equipment that we needed for clinical care. We figured that you could actually start businesses and run them around. At the same time, I was doing my own research, and I was watching how startup companies work. And it started with a lot of the modern methods in urology started at AGH, where we had a big part in. And it started with laser lithotripsy, ultrasound, cryosurgery. And you watched how startup companies grew, what they did that worked, what they did that didn't work. And I was fascinated by this. And, fundamentally, I'm very curious. I like to learn. And it took me down a lot of roads I never really knew existed, going just through college and medical school and fellowship. This also culminated in me ending up as the president of AGH for 4 years, which is something I swore I would never do. But they asked me to do it, and I really had a great time doing it. And I put a limit as to how long I would do this. And, my goals were to get the hospital back to where it was in '85. And they asked me to stick around, and, what would I do? And I had this crazy idea about how do you take care of a lot of people? What are you going to do with hospitals? And I'll talk about that, I'm sure, later. But through the entire process, it's been about how do you work with people? How do you get to a goal? How do you make it sustainable? And how do you solve problems? So that's sort of a brief overview of the things that I speak a lot of languages at this point.
Thank you. I think we all owe your wife a debt of gratitude for bringing you to Pittsburgh. Although I have to say, I'm disappointed that you haven't developed a Pittsburgh accent after all these years. So maybe you can work on that for us here in the near future. Will, same question for you. So tell us a little about your career and your career as an entrepreneur and how it's led you to where you are today and what you're doing.
Yeah, happy to. So, Jeff, one of the last things Jeff said was solving problems. And that's kind of been the theme of my career. I went to engineering school at West Virginia. I wanted to be an engineer because I liked solving problems and I liked innovative solutions to those problems. And engineering was something that was attractive to me from that perspective. And by the way, he also mentioned Respironics. I worked at Respironics for many years. I knew George McGovern as well through Jerry McGinnis. And Jerry McGinnis, who's the founder of Respironics, is a dear friend of mine and one of my career mentors. I really learned what entrepreneurship was all about from Jerry. A lot of it goes back to watching what he did to build that company in Murraysville. People talk about the more recent unicorns, but Respironics was really, Respironics and Medrad were, the unicorns of the 80s in this city. People forget that. He built a great company, and I learned so much from working with him and still do. And so I came into my career enjoying solving problems. At some point, I realized that while I enjoyed the product side, I wanted to take it to the next step and solve problems by building companies. And I realized I didn't have the skill set, I didn't have the network, and I didn't have the experience to do that yet. So I came to Carnegie Mellon to get my MBA because Carnegie Mellon at the time was really the only school in the country or the world that had a developed entrepreneurship program. And they were the best. And Jack Thorne started that program, and Dave's done a great job of growing it since he's taken it over. But that's what brought me to Carnegie Mellon, and learned and developed the skills necessary to do a startup. At the same time, about the same time I left Respironics and joined a startup by a local entrepreneur here, company called MedBiz, not to be confused with MedSage, which was my first startup, and learned a lot from doing as one of the senior members of that team, right? And that was in healthcare. I actually, when I went into engineering, almost went into medical school and found doing engineering in the healthcare field was the perfect balance for me to be able to help people and solve problems. And so that's kind of where I've spent my career and where I like to focus. And most of my experience is in the home healthcare space because of those Respironics days. And even the startup I'm doing today is the result of that.
All right, thank you. So interesting that each came from different directions, one from the physician side, one from the engineering side, but sort of landed in the same place with the focus on solving problems for customers. Clearly something that we talk about quite a bit in the Sports Center, and makes a lot of sense in terms of uncovering opportunities and innovation. So let's move on to the next question. Dr. Cohen, this is for you. Can you please describe what's going on at the former Suburban Hospital campus just outside of Pittsburgh, and why you agreed to tackle this project after a long and distinguished career as a physician, administrator, and entrepreneur?
As you go through your career, and and Will, just a shout out, we had sort of like concentric circles, and a lot of these are very well known to Dave Mawhinney, and a couple of the guys that with Respironics were like Don Jones, George McGovern, but along with Don was one of my best friends, Miles Berkman, and it was a very small circle of people that went and did these things.
Right.
And I remember going down to CMU when Raj Reddy was there, and I met Jim Osborne in very early days in natural language processing, and it was always intriguing. And the fundamental thing was curiosity. Is it, what are they doing? How does this work? And how do you get there? So to answer your question about what's going on at Bellevue is Bellevue is the home of Suburban General, which is now at a closed hospital. In 1985, it was a good community hospital. It was a step below AGH, but certainly a very substantial community hospital, very much like other hospitals that I was on staff with, like St. Clair or Swickley or Washington Hospital. They were foundational to their communities. The doctors out there were very good, solid people, and you had really two quaternary facilities in town, as AGH and Presby. So I used to have privileges at Suburban, and you watch the ravages that the changes in the economy have created for healthcare. And the easiest way to describe it is that at the time that I first came to town, steel was starting to trend down, and the changes that the steel industry went through, all industries are going through, and healthcare is going through this right now. How do you do things better, cheaper, and faster? And there's two sides of disruption. One is the innovator, and the other one is the displaced person. And they have very definite effects on populations and costs. So it doesn't take as many people to do something, which was described 200 years ago in Adam Smith's The Pin Factory. So as you start getting specialization of labor, you don't need 5,000 people to make steel. You need 250 to have masters. And the same thing with healthcare. You're seeing tremendous changes in healthcare right now, which reflect a lot of the information age, where it used to be that you would bring the patient to the source of information, which was the hospital. That's where the doctors were. That's where the doctors went to get their patients. That's where the resources were. Today, it's the web. And as you do this, the need for these hospitals goes down. So here you have a perfectly good building that's maintained at a very high standard, and it's closed because of the costs of maintaining it, and mostly the personnel. How do you find urologists and pulmonologists and hematologists? And they're very expensive. And does every hospital need these? And can you get the same results by going on the web and providing services? And what we're watching is this transition that's going through healthcare right now. So, as I finished up my tenure as president of AGH, I had achieved the goals that I set out for myself. And they asked me what I wanted to do. And I kept looking at Suburban and going, I wonder if you could use this as a way of rebuilding a community. And this community asset, how do you repurpose it to deal with this disruption that's going through the American economy? And if you look at Western Pennsylvania, it's a microcosm for the country. You go to small and medium-sized towns, one of the hospitals will close or has closed or consolidated. And in Pittsburgh, there's been 10 facilities over the last 10 years that have either closed or consolidated into AHN or UPMC. And the days of the private hospitals are over. What also turns out when you go to a Johnstown or a Punxsutawney or Indiana, and just substitute that for any small town in America, that is the largest employer in most of these towns. So when they close, you start having a lot of people that are disrupted, and the jobs aren't there, and it has a huge economic effect. The other thing that drove me to do this is, as president, I got the raw data, and it's very hard for doctors to understand this, is that you have two patients, your job is to get them better. You're a provider. They trust you to take care of them. And what you need to do is fix them. So when they don't do the same, what did you do wrong? Why are these two people doing differently? What is it about your treatments or your approach to this case that's different? And I kept seeing as a hospital president that the patients that came from poor areas had three very unique characteristics. They stayed longer, and they consumed more resources. They did worse, and they had more complications. And coincidentally, they paid you less. You put those three together, and it's not a real winner for a hospital system. So the end result of this is that you're going to see a lot of hospitals close and a lot of unemployment in small towns, and access to healthcare in poor neighborhoods where the population goes on to a Medicaid or straight Medicare. There's something different. There's something else going on here, which I never realized in my career as a practicing physician. I see Lynn Porter on there. She's probably nodding her head yes at this. Poor people don't do as well for reasons that we don't understand. And the fundamental question is why? And we all have biases as to what we think is the answer, but we don't know why. So when you look at the disproportionate consumption of resources for poor people and hospitals that are closing, this cycle continues to go on as there's more and more disruption in the market. So I look at Suburban as a very big whiteboard to look at disruption, by creating it with companies like Will that do a really good job of addressing a need that's going to make it better, cheaper, and faster for people to have the opportunity to do whatever they want to do with their lives. The other side is the disrupted, is that they suffer from a number of factors which are loosely defined as social determinants of health. The most important and largest one is always hunger. And it's amazing to me that within 3 miles of AGH, there's 81 food banks. And I marvel at the fact that there can never be a hungry person, but yet there are. And what is the relationship between these social determinants and how patients disproportionately do worse with Medicaid than are on Medicaid? And it can be dressed up as there's other ways of describing it, of healthcare inequity, social inequity. The problem is poor people do not do as well as people that have commercial insurance. And what drove me to do this was when you go to medical school, they always ask you the same question: why do you want to be a doctor? And you raise your hand and you swear, say, it's because I like science, I want to help people. And then you realize 35, 40 years later, it's true. So I look at this as a way of trying to understand the factors that drive the differential in outcomes for patients and study disruption such that we could scale this model to these hospitals that are going to close in poor neighborhoods and start looking at incubators, as well as understanding how to fix some of the factors that we find within these social determinants. So I'll stop there. So what's going on at Bellevue is basically extremely disruptive. And it's disruptive in a very good way of giving people an opportunity to understand these factors and hopefully to show a direction to change the healthcare system from being a sickness system to include these social factors, understand them, and how to mitigate the damage it does to the human condition so that they have an opportunity to do what they want to do with their lives.
Thank you. It sounds like there's an opportunity out there to prove some things that can make dramatic changes, not just here in Pittsburgh, but around the country.
We're allowed the privilege to think anything we want because nobody really gets this. So, if we have an idea, we want to try it, we do it. And as long as it refers to healthcare, it's really a privilege to be able to do this.
Okay, thank you. Will, the next question is for you. So I classify you as a serial entrepreneur, meaning you have a number of startups under your belt and you've been in and around the innovation ecosystem for a long time and a large part of your career. But you've launched a new initiative, you've got a new company that you're standing up and getting off the ground. So why don't you tell us a bit about Sovasage and sort of what motivated you to get on that merry-go-round once again?
So before I get started, I just want to highlight one thing about Suburban. The first time I met Jeff was during COVID. Gosh, that was a year ago now, Jeff, right?
Yeah.
We were all together trying to solve problems for this new pandemic, and we hadn't really figured out yet. Not that we haven't figured out now. But Jeff said, come on down to Suburban, we'll test it right here in a hospital bed, right? That's something that's unique about that facility, that you can do testing in the healthcare space that's in a healthcare space, real world. And just not just any facility can provide that kind of environment. I think that's a unique part about what he's doing there. So as far as Sovasage, when I talked about my background, I mentioned that I have spent most of my career in the home healthcare space. When I was at Respironics, I ran the engineering team, amongst other things, that developed a lot of the masks for a therapy called CPAP, continuous positive airway pressure, which is used to treat obstructive sleep apnea. I guess I also mentioned Jerry McGinnis. Jerry and I have remained good friends and always agreed that, while the technology that's used to treat that condition has evolved tremendously over the last 30 years, the actual process that's used to manage those patients hasn't changed at all. And that if you could change that process and use new technologies like artificial intelligence, like computer vision, to not only automate it, not just take cost out, but also do it better, then you could really make a difference. And that was the beginning of Sovasage, which is actually my fourth dive into the entrepreneurial pool. And its beginning was centered around if we can solve the mask problem, which is the biggest failure point for continuous positive airway pressure, if we can make that simpler, if we can make it more reliable, if we can make it more efficient, then you could change that whole market. And so I actually started on this project, probably it's probably 3 years ago now. So while the marketplace thinks of Sovasage as this brand new company, and we introduced our product last fall, there was a lot of prep work that went into kind of testing different ideas and seeing what worked and what didn't work. Kind of what Jeff was talking about, the privilege of thinking anything and trying things that might have been crazy until we got something that worked. And I had been working on that idea for 2 years ago, 2 years at the time when this pandemic hit. And I said, I met Jeff working on a project related to COVID. Not long after that project, I had a couple advisors come to me and say, can't you use that project you've been working on and incubating, kind of why you've been a member of the faculty at Carnegie Mellon, to help these home healthcare providers get back into business and get back to helping patients? And so we took what we were doing, which was really a research basis at that point, and turned it into a virtual patient in-service tool that allowed home healthcare providers and respiratory therapists to do everything they used to do in person for a patient suffering from obstructive sleep apnea, but do it like we're talking right now, right? Do it virtually over a computer. And that in itself, if that's all we did, that would have been nice. And probably when the pandemic, whenever we get past this pandemic, it probably would have gone away and we'd go back to the way we were. But what we managed to do while we did that was do it actually better than the in-person process. And that's the staying power of what Sovasage is about. So we use artificial intelligence and computer vision to help clinicians do a better job of taking care of their obstructive sleep apnea patients.
Great, thank you. And so I think that's a great segue into moving the discussion towards kind of entrepreneurship. We obviously have a number of current and aspiring entrepreneurs in the audience, obviously with an interest in healthcare. Otherwise, I'm not so sure that they'd be taking their dinner time to sit in and listen to us talk. So can you talk a little bit, Will, based on your experience, some of the unique challenges that a healthcare based startup may face, and some of the lessons learned or some of the tips you may have, as folks sort of think about, we've had a lot of discussion around solving problems, right? And so it's a little more complex than that when we start to talk about healthcare solutions. So a little bit of insight into your experiences around the unique challenges that entrepreneurs may face as they enter this world, and some benefit of your experience to provide a little guidance.
Well, yeah, so it's a great question. I mean, the strength of going into healthcare from an entrepreneurship perspective is also the weakness of it, right? Which is, the strength is you get to help people while you solve problems, and that's fantastic. The weakness is you're helping people, so you better not screw it up, right? So, the result of that is that, healthcare startups generally require more capital. There's more regulatory overhead that you have to bear. And rightfully so, because, as Jeff said, they're putting their trust in you to help take care of them, whether you're the physician or the respiratory therapist. If the technology is aiding them, it better work, and it better do exactly what's expected. So, if your startup is a device related business, you are regulated by the FDA. And with that process comes a fair amount of overhead, right? That requires a specialized set of experiences that generally you need help in acquiring, and you don't want to do that. You don't want to be an amateur at that, right? You need to have experience so that you do it right the first time. Now my business is a startup business, or in a software business, and as a software business, I may have some more latitude, but software products can also be classified as medical devices, and really in many ways are subject to the same rigor that a medical device hardware company is subject to. So you've got the overhead associated with the regulatory side. And I think you also have, and rightfully so, some increased barriers with customer adoption, because they're not going to just buy your product because you're a good salesperson or because they like what you're doing. You better prove that it delivers what you say it's going to do. Like, you have to make claims, and then you have to prove that you can deliver those claims. And so, if you're thinking about doing a startup in the hardware space, or in the healthware space, go into it with open eyes, right? It's going to require more money and probably more time than if you go into e-commerce. But it has some great rewards on the other end, because you get to help people while you hopefully build a great company.
That's great. Thank you. And Dr. Cohen, so you've worn a number of hats over your career. I'm going to ask you to put your president of AGH hat on as you think about the same question. So when you look at companies that come to you, new ideas, innovations, and you're the customer of folks like Will, right? What are the things that you look for? What are the characteristics? What are the different factors that weigh into your decision as to whether or not you want to work with the company, acquire their product, endorse what they're doing?
So as president of AGH, everything Will said is absolutely true. You have limited time, you have limited capital, you've got a lot of different constituents that all want something, which include the doctors, the maintenance people, the buildings. And as president of AGH, if there's not 3 disasters a day, it's a good day. So you've got about 3 minutes to get my attention and tell me why what you have is better, cheaper, or faster than what I have, or how it's going to do something for the patients that I'm responsible for that can't be done anywhere else. Number 2, I look at entrepreneurs as people that have a personality defect. Okay, they're very much like surgeons, right or wrong, but never undecided. You have to have a lot of confidence in yourself. And when somebody comes and sits to talk to me as president of AGH, I want somebody that looks like me and says, hey, pay attention to what I'm talking to you. I got something really good. And if you don't have that confidence in what you're doing and why you're doing it, it's very obvious, especially if you're an entrepreneur yourself. You look for people that look like you. And if that's the case, you're going to be very hard on them, and probably 1 in 25 might actually get an introduction to the clinicians, because if I screw it up, I got to listen to them whine to me. Like, why'd you send me this guy? He's a pain in the ass. So don't come in super happy, like, hi, how are you? I've got this great thing for you. No, forget that. And then I have to fit it into a budget of priorities as to what are the things I have to do. Like, if I don't have I didn't even know what an air handler was when I took my job. I found out that A, they hadn't been replaced since 1978, and B, is they're very expensive. But if I don't have one, I don't have an operating room. Now, you may have the greatest widget in the world, but given a choice between an operating room and what your device is, where do you fit in those priorities? So your value statement of what you're trying to do is very important of telling me what to do. Just one quick story about when I met Will and why I call entrepreneurship a personality. I do that with great love. Will's device was fabulous. It had exhaust tubing that he got from Home Depot, that from a dryer. There was large plastic wrappers around it. It was a plexiglass box. This was absolutely kludged together to answer a problem. And we actually stuck somebody in it and had them try to breathe. And we realized that the excursion for their chest wasn't enough, and the box was going up and down. But we had several people that had different points of view that could look at it. And I remember very early in my career, I was building a device. One of the great places to shop in a hospital is a basement. And I needed a pump. So I got one of the old cardiac pumps, and I found Tygon tubing and zip ties. And you put all this stuff together. I think the cost of goods for that was probably about $4. And it was the first one that was ever built, but it was purely, this is my imagination of what it looks like. How close can I get to the stuff that I have? And totally independent, what I saw with Will, exactly the same mindset of the problem was preeminent. As president of the hospital, I look for that. I look for the confidence people have in their own beliefs, that they have something that they can tell me is going to help my patients. They can do it quickly, succinctly, and they can tell me why it's more important that what they're doing, as opposed to something else, is going to help a patient, which might be them or their loved ones, the next week. So hope that helps.
No, it's really insightful to get the perspective from Will around sort of the entrepreneurial side of things and why you are building this, and your prioritization around what you're building and for whom, and your perspective on the decision-making process in terms of how you evaluate opportunities, technologies, and the buckets that you need to fit them into in terms of whether they do or don't solve problems for you and they make sense economically. And so I think we can all take good advice away from that, right? And sort of understanding the priorities around what we're building, why we're building it, and who's going to pay for it, because that's really all that matters, right? So very helpful. And along those lines, Dr. Cohen, I'm going to put you on the spot again. When you talked about the Bellevue campus and we were talking about entrepreneurship, I know that you have a relationship with an incubation program out there, and that you've actually got an opportunity to work with companies, provide a little funding. And in addition, I'm sure, to our entrepreneurs in the audience that are interested in understanding the comings and goings of starting a company and how you prioritize what you're going to do, the funding question always comes up, because Will said it takes time and quite a bit of money to move forward with healthcare innovations and new ideas. So can you tell us a little bit about the program, how you work with companies, in a way that folks can get off the ground?
So one of the things that I thought was very important for the entrepreneurial class in this area was to get some good competition going. And since the AGH bankruptcy in '98, UPMC has been the dominant force in startups. And their model is that they have to own the startup, which doesn't work real well for everybody. So I decided that in doing the innovation part, we approached Innovation Works, and we set up a joint venture, which is called AlphaLab Health. And from the very outset, it was clear that Innovation Works has a lot of experience with AlphaLab and AlphaLab gear, but they had not gotten into the health space, and they wanted to. And we wanted to get into the incubator space, and we knew what both of us were good at. So the process by which you evaluate companies is their domain. The process of building the facility understanding what's needed in healthcare is sort of our domain. So it was a natural marriage. And we did our first solicitation, of which Will's company is, I'm really pleased that he accepted it. One of the initial class for AlphaLab Health, we do several things. One is we have money to invest in the company, which is up to $100,000 for, this is like friends and family round. Number two is there's free rent because you're part of AlphaLab. So for the facilities that you need, we have space at Suburban. We got lots of space so that afterwards, if you need a home, it's a great place to start a company because it's heated, air conditioned, and cheap. And it has several other characteristics that are good for entrepreneurs. One is because I've been at AGH and AHN for the better part of 35 years, I know who to tap. So finding expertise in different domains. The day that Will came over, we had 2 critical care pulmonologists. One was the chair of department, a fellow, a resident, myself, and Joe Gordon, the respiratory therapist who volunteered to get in the box. That was with one phone call. If your device works and you get FDA approval for it, then we have a small insurance company called Highmark that would be very interested in paying for it because you've proven that part of the question you're answering is relevant and you're going to do it better, cheaper, and faster than what we have. So it's beneficial to the system and it creates innovation and change, which is the hardest thing to do, is to change things. So we're very excited. Our first class is up and running. We have 7 companies in it. 3 of them come out of Pitt. And that the days where we can't talk to you and you can't talk to us, well, the truth is at the level of taking care of patients, everybody knows everybody. We talk to each other all the time. Boardrooms, they may want to scratch each other's eyes out at times. But the reality is that for this area too, everybody gets along pretty well. We've had really good relations with the innovation folks at Pitt and CMU and LifeX. A number of people have come over. And, it's great to see that the opportunity is there for people that are going to start companies in Western Pennsylvania, have another option, which is going to be a low cost option with funding, with real estate, with expertise. And that's what's going to differentiate us from other places around the country.
Yeah, it seems to check a lot of boxes that an early company needs in terms of getting off the ground on the right foot. So I assume that folks can go out and look at Innovation Works website, look for you and find information on the AlphaLab Health program. So those of you in the audience that are starting companies or thinking about starting companies, I would certainly encourage you to check the program out and see if it makes sense. I'm certain there's lots of information out there for you. And so Will, as we sort of get closer to the end of our time here before we open up the Q&A, you talked early on about life as an entrepreneur and focusing on solving problems for customers, which clearly it's come across that's your sort of starting point, right? You think about what problems are customers experiencing and how can you solve them in a meaningful and better way. And that is a very important first step. There's so much more to consider when starting a company, when launching an effort, when thinking about oneself as an entrepreneur. Almost an overwhelming number of things to think about. So, based on your experience, what are some sort of factors that are important, and I think you and I talked a little bit about this before the event tonight, talking about the importance of team, right? Building a team, thinking about, what your business model may be, some other sort of factors that you think about beyond solving that customer problem that our entrepreneurs in the audience should prioritize as they sort of think about whether they have something that could grow.
Well, I mean, so you're right. The list is long, and you and I teach it in our classes, right? You have to worry about funding. You have to worry about your team. You need to worry about whether you have a market that can grow a big company that's worth you spending all of this blood, sweat, and tears to do. Because if anybody is out there wondering whether entrepreneurship is glamorous, it's not. In fact, it usually is not, right? It's a lot of work. You better pick something that you're passionate about and that you love, because you will live it, you will breathe it. I literally told this story to one of my classes that the other night and this is probably more usual than it's not, I woke up dreaming about my business, right? You never are not thinking about your business, right? So, you have to worry about fundraising. You have to worry about whether the market's big enough. You have to worry about what's unique and what your competition is, because, your competition's not going to stand still. I'm probably a little bit unique in that, and we've talked about this. I'm a product guy, right? So I really, really focus on, do I have the right customer product market fit that creates sufficient value? And you have to get that right first. If you get that right, the rest of the process, including fundraising, including scaling, including building the right team, is so much easier. Notice I didn't say easy, easier. And by the way, you also have to have an end goal in mind. What's your ultimate goal here? What do you want to do with this company? Do you want to sell it? Do you want to run it for a long time? And what caused you to go into this endeavor in the first place? One of the things that I often tell folks is, if you want to be an entrepreneur because it's going to make you wealthy, that's probably the wrong reason to do it. Hopefully the byproduct of being successful is you'll generate some wealth, but you need to be able to do it because you're passionate about something and want to make a difference. Because when you realize how much work is involved, your hourly rate is probably not that great, because you're going to put a lot more hours into it than doing a corporate job somewhere or teaching for a school or any other profession you go into.
Right. So we recognize it's a lot of work, but some of the things you said earlier around the passion, the satisfaction, your ability to sort of build things based on your own vision, all those matter too, right? So there's both sides of the equation. You're going to work really hard. It's very risky, but the payoff economics, one piece of it, but there are so many more benefits to pursuing your passion. And I think it's
That's
coming.
why it's so important that you do something that you're passionate about and that you love. Because if you do that, the old saying, if you do something that you love, you never work a day in your life. That's the way you have to kind of look at it.
Oh, well, thank you. So we're coming up on the end of our time, and I want to make sure we've some Q&A opportunity. So first of all, it was a pleasure for me to have an opportunity to speak with both of you, and to get a little bit of insight into what you're doing now and a little bit into your philosophies around entrepreneurship and innovation and healthcare in Pittsburgh, all things that are important to many of us on this call. So appreciate your time and expertise. And just quickly before we turn it over to Haley and start to manage some Q&A, I try to not to put people on the spot, but at the end of these types of forums, I like to ask, can you go back and give yourself early in your career a piece of advice, right? Or a piece of advice for the audience, one thing to keep in mind, one sort of takeaway, right, that folks can sink their teeth into as they think about their journeys as entrepreneur, either current or aspirational and in the future. So if you want to pass, I understand. Again, I don't like to put folks on the spot, but Dr. Cohen, is there any final sort of piece of advice that you'd like to provide to the audience before we open it up?
Yeah, fundamentally, I'm a surgeon. So my advice for entrepreneurs is don't believe your own bullshit. Always question, always listen, and try and listen more than you talk. It took me years to be able to do that. You're all smart, but you have a lot to learn.
Perfect. How about you, Will?
One of my philosophies that I believe in strongly is don't live your life dictated by fear, right? So don't be afraid to fail. Manage your risk. It's like what Mark Cuban says, you only have to succeed once. So, don't be afraid to fail. Go after your dream.
All right, great. So on that note, again, appreciate your time, your insights, being so open with all of us. Really interesting and enjoyable for me. Haley, I'm going to turn it over to you to manage Q&A.
Yeah, great. So first, we have a question from Jenny Cassidy, and I'll hand it over to her.
Yeah, I even turned my video on, Haley, to follow the rules. So Jeff's gonna really like this part when I say what I do. So I'm an actuary. and I work in health insurance. And I actually left, I've left the Fortune 10 world and started out on my own, but that was not really where my question was. So I'm familiar with the Western PA market, mostly because of the UPMC Highmark trade war that goes on and basically allows no other competition in from the payer side. So my question is, in terms of entrepreneurship, I was really interested, Jeff, in what you were saying about like delivery models and using innovation in the operating room. I'm curious if there's more opportunity and if there should be more energy put with providers bringing like financial innovation. Like I feel like, so I came from the payer side, right? Like the Blues, Aetna, we're always pushing our ideas on the providers and through the system, and they're very financially driven. Like they're coming from me, right? So it's like just cut, make it cheaper. It's all about the bottom line, and it's all about people making money somewhere. But I see an opportunity for some kind of major change, and I'm just curious where you think we could be, especially with a Democratic administration right now that may actually do something with the ACA.
Yeah, that's probably about a 3-week answer. So I'll summarize as best as I can answer your question at a time. I agree that healthcare insurance is going to change the way we fund it. And there's going to be a lot of opportunities to try different models. You're looking at 1/6 of the largest economy in the history of mankind, and changing that enormous ship is going to be difficult. But fundamentally, you've got a culture war going on between providers, patients, and payers. And the culture war is that, for the most part, I don't want the providers to sound more noble than the reality is, but for the most part, they really do try and help. Okay, they may not get it always right because they're people, they make mistakes, there's all kinds of flaws within the provider community, but the thing that keeps people coming back is that you trust your provider, the nurse, the PA, the physician, the physical therapist, whoever it is, to help you. And they're helping you at the worst time in your life. And the fundamental model that is so difficult for people to get within the industry is that insurers have customers. They're otherwise known as employers. Employers have employees that consume a product called healthcare at a much decreased cost compared to what the real costs are. And the providers take care of patients, otherwise known as employees. And then they submit a bill to an insurer. And the entire model is based on who's going to screw who in this whole process. So the alignment of the provider and the payer together that Highmark is, exploring right now is really a fundamental first step in aligning people's interests, that you're here to take care of patients, because the secret is that if you do less and you pay the premiums the same, there's still a lot more money left over at the end of it. So it's not to say that they don't care about the patients, but their primary driver is that they're a business and they're there to make money. Okay, the primary goal for the providers is to take care of you because that's what they signed up to do. The primary goal of the employee patient is, how the hell do I get out of this mess? Because I got a problem and I got to fix it. So there's going to be significant changes in the way that we finance this over the next 20 years. And the pendulum will go back and forth. You're going to have doctors and nurses. You're going to have a mechanism to pay for it. But the alignment of interest needs to be more in concert with the purpose of healthcare. So I'll stop there because I could talk about this for weeks.
Well, I appreciate it regardless, because that's my day-to-day. It's every day.
Great. Thank you, Jenny, so much. We really appreciate your question and your participation. So next up in the chat, we have a question from Gary Miller. So for the audience's benefit, the AlphaLab initiative has funds, office space, wet labs, providers, hospitals, and a payer. I won't ask you to force rank these in order of importance, but what is the one thing you would tell entrepreneurs to focus on with regards to AlphaLab health candidates?
Come in and tell us what your passion is for what you're doing and why. Tell me why you want to do that. And, this first round, we had around 80 companies, 15 were from overseas, and we picked 7. We probably could have picked 15 or so. And you do have to make decisions just at the end of the day. But for the most part, what we wanted to hear is, tell me why you believe that what you have is novel, and where does it fit, and how are you going to do it? And how are we going to help you achieve that goal? That's what we want to hear. So if you're doing this, as Will said, you're doing this to get rich, it's probably not the right place for you. Okay. If you're doing this because you have a passion for something and you can figure out how to solve the problem and make it a sustainable business, there's probably a place for you at the table somewhere.
Great, thank you. Will, anything you think to add as sort of someone who's gone through the process and is part of the current cohort?
You're on mute, Will.
Sorry. So from my perspective, it's all about solving real problems, right? If you're solving a real problem that, if eliminated, creates value for the payer, for the provider, and for the patient, and it doesn't have to be in any particular order. It could, but it has to be a real problem, then you can create value. And I think that the organization that between Allegheny Health Network and IW has created is a really unique opportunity for companies like SovaSage and others to be able to immediately tap into that expertise, right? To be on a phone call with the head of the sleep therapy clinical unit at Allegheny General, right? To sit through a presentation of where Highmark thinks the business is going in the next 3 years, which I did this morning, right? So that kind of stuff is worth way more than the money, right? The money's nice. You need the money because that's what gets the business off the ground, but the expertise is irreplaceable.
Great, thanks, Will. We have another question now from Julie Austin. So Julie loves the idea of repurposing Suburban. So Dr. Cohen, can you tell us more about how you envision using the space? So we're looking at offices versus wet lab space. Will there be a sim lab type space like Pitt's Weiser or animal ORs in the basement? Or in the BST? What did they leave behind in the basement, as a manner of speaking?
Well, Suburban was on my balance sheet as president of AGH. And the first thing I wanted to do was tear it down or sell it, because I didn't know what else to do with it. And, as a hospital was never going to do anything. And there was a fixed cost for maintaining it. And I'm glad I didn't. So it's 230,000 square feet. And it's in a community that used to be middle class, and it's on the border of poverty. U.S. labor statistics, you can see exactly where it is. So you start adding in the assets that AGH has with it, is that we have a vivarium. Allegheny Singer Research Lab is a very nice research group. And we have facilities over there. So if you need a vivarium, we have all the certifications to use it. It goes through, institutional reviews, et cetera. And we can leverage the facilities at AGH as well. In terms of what's going to be there, it's really a white page. So, AlphaLab Health will be taking over. Initially, we thought about using the old OR, and we have a fixed amount of money that we can spend, and we could not comfortably do what we wanted to do and have the product we wanted. So we actually moved it to the old ICU, and we have lots of space that we can reconfigure in many ways. So for non-wet lab companies, we recently just renovated 10 old patient rooms, And to see the difference between a double bed 1930 vintage patient room and today, which looks like a pretty nice office. We need to be able to charge fair market value, but it's Class B office building in Bellevue. So we're talking really low rents. We're talking all in with parking, the whole bit, like between $13 and $20 a foot. 20 is for the labs, because our goal is not to make money on the building. Our goal is to inject innovation into the system. So we need to be able to charge enough that we don't get in trouble for inurement, which is a dirty word in the insurance industry. We can't give it away as a non-for-profit. We have to do this at a fair market value, but the actual asset is relatively cheap. So there's a company that came out of CMU that's leasing lab space right now. And they were looking at spending $1,000, $2,000 a month at U Park and elsewhere at a minimum in town. I looked at it, I said, how about $250 a month? How's that work for you? She goes, what? I said, yeah, our goal here, once again, is not to make money on the real estate. So we have some novel ideas about how to engage the local school district to do segmentation for AI programming for machine vision company. You've got future hackers of America sitting in a school district and they're 18 years old, and some of them don't have enough to eat, but yet they're not stupid, they're just hungry. So if we can feed them and give them a purpose and they can make some money, it solves many problems. And that's the point of using a non-for-profit community asset, formerly a hospital, and repurposing it into something that's going to benefit this community. I look at this as 4 pillars of community: education, healthcare, religion, and government. And the fact that it's no longer a hospital, or it doesn't mean it can't take care of people. It's just going to do it in a different fashion. So, it's a big white paper. And for those of you that are entrepreneurs that want to think about this on a real estate basis, come on over and show me what you can do, because there's going to be a lot of empty hospitals out there that are going to need repurposing for communities. And Lord knows, I'm not the only one with this idea. This is good for not just Bellevue, Pennsylvania, but Fairmont, West Virginia, and through the rest of the country. The needs for this that I see are significant, and it's a great opportunity to take cheap real estate that was maintained at a very high level to take care of patients and repurpose it and lift up a population.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dr. Cohen. So now we have one last question. I think it's a great note to sort of end on. So for the two of you, do you have, this is a question from Martina. So do you have any additional do's and don'ts recommendations for new healthcare startups that are aiming to build a successful company?
Who's going first? You want to go, Jeff?
Yeah, I'm going to echo what Will said. Don't do it because you think you have to. Do it because it's a lot of fun and it's a privilege and it's really what you believe you should be doing. The tactics of how you get there, like, don't come in and drool all over yourself. Okay, you know that already. Well, let your passion loose, and it's really a privilege to help people. And as a surgeon and a physician, I've had the opportunity to do that in really miserable times. Sometimes it's really painful, where you have to go and talk to a family and say, they're going to die, or this is not going to work out the way you think it is. But the other side is, you come into a miserable situation, and you can fix it, and you can have a direct impact on giving somebody back their life. That's really a kick. And yeah, it sounds like a noble goal, but I liked it. It was fun. You got a lot of validation and satisfaction about doing this. So what I tell you to do is think about this as an opportunity to be helpful, to serve, and achieve a lot of different goals. You're going to help people, you're going to employ people, you're going to change some things. And if that's what you're about, then go for it and have a really good time doing it.
And I'll echo back a little bit of what Jeff said in a different way, in that you heard him say early on that it was a good day if you only had 3 crises, right? You solve a big problem, make a big difference, because if you solve the 6th priority on his list today, you're probably not going to get his attention. So solve a big problem that's going to make a big difference and hopefully build a big company.
Great. Thank you guys so much. We really appreciate everyone's time tonight. Craig, Dr. Cohen, Will, and everyone who attended. We appreciate you spending your dinner hour with us. So tomorrow we'll go ahead and we'll send a copy of the recording out to all of you, as well as relevant links to all of the companies and initiatives that we discussed, and LinkedIn links to our panel. And yeah, do you have anything else to add before we sign off, anybody? Great.
Been a
All
pleasure.
right. Well,
Yeah,
hey,
absolutely. It's been fun. Thank you.
no, thank you all. We really appreciate your time, and everybody have a great night. Thank you.